Dear friends and colleagues and members of the audience, so our conference is drawing to an end, and we have the opportunity to listen to Professor Selart from the University of Tartu, who will give us the closing statement.
Yes. I'll see what was the point, or whether there was any point. But if I may, I'd like to start with a small text from Russian writers Ilf and Petrov from the famous novel The Golden Calf. Yeah. I'm reading. What people are not doing. Parallel to the big world in which big people and big things live, there is a small world with small people and small things. In the big world, a diesel engine was invented. Yet souls were written, the Dnieper hydroelectric plant was built, and a flight around the world was made. It's written around early 30s. In a small world, the screaming bubble UD was invented, the song Pricks was written, and trousers of the plenipotentiary ambassador style were invented. In the big world, people are driven by the desire to do good to humanity. The small world is far from such high matters. Its inhabitants have only one desire, to somehow live without feeling hunger. It was the idea I had when I heard the papers during this conference, that very similar to this text by 20th century writers. Also, when we are talking about Baltic history, there are the big history and the small history. And typically, we are just treating them separately. It's a story about emperors, kings, and crusaders, and there is a story about eating, having some struggle with chairs, and some Nicholas will be killed, and so on. What's important, I think, it's to demonstrate how the two stories are actually very closely connected. That in some point, the fate of some seaman Nicholas is decided by the Danish king some several hundreds kilometers away, and it can easily happen that in some point it can happen vice versa. When we are talking about Denmark and Estonia in the Middle Ages, then actually it's a topic everybody knows, that Denmark and Livonia were closely connected, and the part of Estonia was a part of the Danish crown. But at the same time, however, all this story lays still outside the mainstream story of Baltic history. From the point of view of Livonian history, the central topics are still the Teutonic Order, Archbishop of Riga, Hanseatic trade, and so on. And the Danish connections are still very much on side. But it's, in this way, it's a really good example how the big history and small history are connected. As Kurt demonstrated, the politics of King Valdemar II was closely connected to very great crusading plans. We certainly can ask, what does it mean, a great plan in medieval history? As we know, mostly all great plans fail. Anyway, when the plans were there, they influenced how the people acted in real life, and in this way they had impact on the outcome. So, what was the plan of Danish kings with Estonia and Livonia? Maybe not very correct question from my side in this context, I'd like to answer somehow in some time, maybe in very far future, is what actually was the role of economic and trade politics in the Baltic history of the 13th century. When we are talking about Baltic Crusades, it's one very famous explanation is that the Germans, the Danes, the Swedish king maybe even had some trade interests in Rus, in Novgorod, in Pskov, in Polotsk, but at the same time it seems that the trade interest in medieval history is a very universal explanation. It can fit everywhere, and in this sense it does not say us anything. And in this context of the very big crusading plans of the King of Denmark and other royal entities, there were just very small survival strategies of local people presented by Christian Kaljusaar, for example, even going in so much in details that we can say that there was no Estonia in 13th century, even no Harjumaa, but different strategies and interests in different castles in one relatively small territory in Vargola and Lohut. And it's really worth of mentioning that certainly in big countries like Denmark, there certainly was not very unified Danish interests, but still there were king, the church, there were nobility, there were very individual persons which could have their own interests. As we know, as historians here, it's very improbable that we will have any additional written sources from 12th or 13th centuries. So it's very promising way to read the very well-known sources again and again, and at the same time also to investigate the history, how the documents were understood in the past, like Tiina Kala did demonstrate us. And it's again, I would say, a place where the knowledge of context, the knowledge of parallel developments in neighboring countries is very important. So maybe the interpretations in Lübeck or Hamburg can explain us how some document was understood in Tallinn or Riga. And it's also, I think, important to stress again that the many transunts and copies made from the documents of Danish periods indeed indicate that, so to say, the Danish time did not end in Estonia in 1346. The authority of Danish kings, their legal decisions and the documents issued by Danish kings preserved its importance in subsequent centuries. When we do not have written sources, we can rely on archaeology, artifacts, topics like the street net, and again the analogies, the parallel developments from the big history. It's simple to say that we do not know anything, and certainly there is some limitations we should make when we use hypotheses, when we use or when we build our ideas on ideas of other historians which are not proven very well. There are very numerous cases. So we really should find some medium way between very harsh source criticism and fantasy in the research. I would say that the presentation of Villu Kadakas indicated it very well. There are some preliminary hypotheses by Baltic German architect Wilhelm Neumann from the beginning of the 20th century, then a very large impact of Danish, Estonian, Baltic German historian Paul Johansen, which is unproven hypothesis which had its impact on all subsequent authors like Leo Tieck and Rein Sobel. And I did understand correctly, the modern research goes partly back to some ideas of Neumann, that's rejecting the real, very fantastic hypothesis or unproven hypothesis by Johansen. Maybe the aspect I'd like to have more discussion in this context of the early settlement of Tallinn would be the property rights. So I still think that the first house builders and citizens were not squatters who just took some places on some no man's land. I still think that even when the plan of the town followed most probably the topography of this place, there should be some kind of organizing power. I have no idea on what level, but still, at least at some point, there should be some kind of organizing power, and we cannot accept the first plot founders as just squatters on some empty place. Stephen Pajung stressed the personal networks. It's again a very close connection between big history and small history. Again, the question of the point of view. Who was the Archbishop Johann Blankenfeld of the early 16th century, for instance? Was he Doctor Utriusque Juris, envoy or papal envoy in Denmark? People who were in Italy during Sacco di Roma, or was it just local bishop in Tartu who had to make opposition to local reformation, as it is mostly only context in typical mainstream presentation of Livonian history. Yes, we know he died in dysentery somewhere in Spain, but it's mostly only aspect mentioned in a short biography of Blankenfeld in very tiny Livonian context. But he was on his way to the emperor. It's a reason why he was in Spain at this time. And indeed, it's a methodological question again. Is it really in this way that quod non est in actis non est in mundo, like the discussion about Foucault exemplarily demonstrated us? I still think that yes, really we need hypotheses, but we need some positive information as well. So missing information is one thing, and that means that probably really was no event, then still the information really can exist as well. And the discussion about the place of Estonia in Danish realm by Thomas Riis and Mikkel Mäesalu also indicated that there are many new possibilities of interpretations, that we cannot think that even when we have monographs and papers and very thorough investigations of 19th century or early 20th century, that everything is done and there is no another possibilities to represent the matter. Then something happened in our conference. We had a very nice evening and very nice dinner. Then we started today early morning with topics of early 16th century. What happened was that we missed all 15th century. I suggest that it's some unfortunate aspect of the research situation. We have topics like Danish pretension to Estonia in early 15th century, which had been investigated, but still the context of our presentations today about the early 16th century indicated very well that Denmark and Livonia were really closely connected in the early 16th century, and it makes very plausible that it was also the case in 15th century. Even I would say that about Henrik Menved, there was a bit not enough discussion during these days and his politics, the Baltic region. And at the same time, the presentation of today, like Johan Köhn said, it was at the same time about große Ostseepolitik and local circumstances. It's again a connection between big and small, and as well Madis Masing demonstrated how the very complicated political situation in the Baltic Sea region in general influenced very local events in Estonia or in Livonia. So I would say that what's a positive side of discussions is that the big and small are to be discussed together, and there is much to do when we are talking about the Danish and Estonian common history. Thank you.